This is Father Gregory Pine.
This is Father Bonaventure Chapman.
And welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoy the show, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. Okay, so Father Bonaventure went to Grove City. I went to Franciscan University of Steubenville. So we sometimes debate whether it's better to be a school that doesn't receive federal funding or a Newman Guide school. But turns out you don't have to choose, because today we are joined by Professor Andrew Whitmore from Christendom College. Thanks for joining.
Thanks so much for having me on the show, Fathers. Thrilled to be here.
Woot. Okay, so folks might know you from your service at Christendom College or from publications of various sorts. But for those who don't, would you say a word of introduction?
Sure. My name is Andrew Whitmore. I teach at Christendom College. We're a small Catholic liberal arts college in Front Royal, Virginia, down in the Shenandoah Valley. I'm a professor of moral theology there. Went and did my graduate studies at the Catholic University of America, and just recently published a book. My specialization was Thomistic virtue ethics. So the book is called Saintly Habits. There's an image of it here. It was published with Ascension Press. I always tell everyone, this isn't a holy cow, right? It's not a golden calf on the cover. It's supposed to be the dumb ox crushing a serpent there. But anyway, it's all about 7 different strategies for growing in virtue, and each chapter is a different aspect of virtue and a different strategy.
Tremendous. That's cool. Is that like commissioned graphic design for the dumb ox stamping on a serpent?
They chose it. They showed me the ones that they didn't choose, and I was glad they chose this one.
Oh, nice. Yeah, this is behind the. This is under the hood, I suppose. When you're publishing books, you don't get. It's not your book. You know, it's got your name on it, but it's not really always your book.
It's not my subtitle either. Aquinas' 7 simple strategies you can use to grow in virtue. I always have to look back.
That's tough.
Said,
I mean,
the more words, the more likely it comes up in a Google search.
There you go. Yeah, we're all slave to the algorithms of the machine. Whether it's the print press says the same thing because of ebooks and such. But this is the time we live in. We preach as we need to.
Father Bonaventure will often make commentary on Sophia Press books, namely that you get bullet points on the back.
Okay.
So you may have written like a kind of, involved tome on some obscure philosophical point, but on the back it'll say 5 ways to prove your enemy's wrong.
Yeah. I'm thinking about if I ever publish my book on Crucius and Kant, I'm going to try to go through Sophia Press first. After, if Presbyterian Reform turns me down, I'm going to go for them so I can get cool bullet points, like 3 good ways of knowing the synthetic a priori. It doesn't require the transcendental deduction.
We have friends at Sophia Institute Press, so we mean no disrespect. We have great appreciation for the various books that you have published.
Just descriptive, not prescriptive comments.
Yeah. Never mind. I should stop talking about the backs of books, because let's not talk about even the fronts of books. Let's talk about the insides of books. Let's talk about people, actually. So one of the things that's cool about the book is that it's not only based on your research, but it's also based on your experience, insofar as teaching virtue is kind of like what one does as a professor of theology and as an administrator at a university. So when it comes to teaching virtue, or maybe you can just source from your book itself, what's the first thing? What would be the first lesson that you would try to communicate to educators or to pedagogues or to whomever?
The first lesson that I would give, or the first point that I would make, probably that it's hard, but that means it's worthwhile, right? I think that one of the challenges with teaching virtue is that I don't know, I can't speak for everybody. I can speak for myself and other people I've talked to, but when we're growing up, I don't think we often think about the moral life as the life of virtue. When I was raised, I thought of it as rules. And so being a good person means following the rules, wherever the rules come from. If they come from God, if they come from your parents, if they come from the state. And what makes a good person is you follow the rules. What makes a bad person is that you break the rules. And it's not that the rules are unimportant, but it's that they're just the foundation. They're just the starting point. And so the life of virtue is just this full flourishing of the human life that goes beyond it. But that's very demanding. It's very challenging, and it can be intimidating, which I think is why sometimes we can kind of sink back into this comfort zone of, well, rules are black and white, and I want to stay there. So that's one of the first challenges, is that kind of helping people to break out of that, just trying to see everything as rules and recognizing that's the starting point. You can follow the rules and still be a jerk. There's a lot more to go beyond that.
Yeah, I sometimes think about this in terms of bowling, because you like it is true that if you're going to be successful in bowling, you should avoid the gutters, right? They will. That's bad news, right? But it's crazy to think that the best bowlers are those who spend all their time thinking about avoiding gutters. To
Yeah.
a good bowler, gutters, you don't even need them there. Like you could just have infinite field. You could just have cool, like super virtue lanes where it's just one big sheet. And they're so good that it's like, it's fine. We're totally good. It's a bit, yeah, we don't need like extra fences between us because I'm just going to go, do that. So with virtue, it's similar. It's like, yeah, of course you have to, like, at you start with things, making sure to avoid the gutters or putting in bumpers to protect you is helpful. But really what you're doing is aiming to knock pins.
Yeah.
And that's a positive thing, as opposed to rules sometimes can sound like what's impermissible. And then as long as I'm not doing impermissible things, I guess that's good. Like I'm being a good person because I haven't violated any rules. Do you have any so students? Because I imagine like all of us, like you're raised in this kind of tradition. All your students, although they're Christendom, so maybe they do come with some from a different angle. But basically, as long as you're not like an ancient Greek person, you're coming at it from rules. So unless time travel happens, like everyone has this, how do you break out of them? This notion of rules and avoiding those things and turn to like positive, like good things. Like is it slapping? Like what's the mechanism?
Basically by illustration. I like to,
Mm-hmm.
so there's a couple of illustrations that I use, and one of them is to draw an analogy with bodily norms. So bodily norms, how do we maintain our health? And when we're kids, again, you have to have rules. Your parents have to tell you, don't eat glass, don't eat dirt, don't drink the Windex under the sink. And as a kid, you're like, oh no, but I want to, right? All my friends are. As you get older, hopefully you don't still have those desires, right? That you're not still aching for that Windex or something. And you don't have to write on your hand every day, like, all right, make sure don't eat glass, don't eat, right? You don't have to remind yourself of that. You internalize it, you mature, you recognize like, well, of course I don't do that. Why would I? Why would that even find that appealing? So you mature, you internalize the intelligibility of those rules, the significance of them. But then you can even go beyond that. And so you recognize, okay, well, how am I going to be fit? Not just avoiding that stuff, but I also have to proactively do something. I need to find out what my metabolism is. Do I exercise? Do I not exercise? Right? Do I have allergies? All these different things. And from that, you can dynamically and creatively figure out how best to maintain your health. So for whatever reason, we make that development for bodily norms. When it comes to moral norms, we often have this like arrested development where we have this kind of immaturity where we stick at the rules part and still think, oh, these are just limiting my freedom. Like I want to commit adultery. I want to murder. I mean, hopefully we don't, but we often see the rules like that. Like it's just an imposition on us. It's a limiting of our freedom. So that's one kind of analogy. The other analogy is to go to skills, all different sorts of skills. So, what is it? Piano playing, soccer playing, whatever it may be. If our freedom in our morality, right? If rules are just a limit on our freedom, then freedom is just, about basically when we can get around the rules. But does that really enable you to be fully yourself, to be fully excellent? And so, imagine somebody who is learning to play piano. You have two people play piano. One, that happened the first time when my first day at Christendom. I was in line at the cafeteria, and in the foyer there was just this piano there. And I played saxophone as a kid. I never learned piano. I didn't want to. I wish I had. My son's playing it now.
We all do.
Hopefully he'll get that.
We all do. Yeah.
So I'm in line here, and the student just walks over, sits down, and just starts playing this masterpiece, like behind his back with his feet. I don't know. It was just amazing. And I was jealous, right? Hopefully not envious. I could do a mean C scale, but that's about it. So, like, are we equally free to play piano? Well, in one sense, yeah. We can both get up there and touch the keys, but are we truly equally free? Can we equally be excellent at it? Like one person can go up there, he can play the C scale if he wants, but he can also sight read, he can improvise, right? Whereas I can just bang the keys. So clearly, how did he get there? He had to start by following the rules. He had to learn the scales. Maybe he didn't want to, But as he does it, he recognizes, oh, I get it. I understand what an octave is. I get major and minor key, and I see why these rules are here. So from that, he can start playing music. And then beyond that, he's able to improvise. The moral life should be like that as well, where we start off with the following of the rules, but if we continue just following the rules only, then we're like a moral simpleton. We're just banging on the keys of the piano. But if we can internalize and recognize, oh, these aren't limiting my freedom, they're actually enabling my freedom, they're helping me to become more excellent, then once we internalize that, we can then act creatively and dynamically from that. And that's the life of virtue.
Yeah, I think I know usually Father Gregory comes in this, but I'm gonna, because it's my pass for a second, but because I played clarinet and jazz, and so I had to play saxophone as well because no one wants just a clarinet. So you gotta learn this silly saxophone, which I did play recently for kicks to make a distinction between an intentional saxophonist and a mere saxophonist on teaching on Anscombe. It's hard.
What
to
did
see
you
the
play?
difference. I just played a couple scale parts. I hadn't played this in a while, but I was trying to see if they could notice the difference between just playing the saxophone and playing it intentionally. It's where you got to pay really close attention. But then you part about, so people think like jazz, they're like, oh, classical music's so hard. You got all the scales and all this kind of thing. And jazz, you can just, you get to go free, man. You just do whatever you want. But that just tells me that's a person who's never played jazz. They have no idea what they're talking about, right? Because like jazz, if you just get up there and you're like, you know what, it's time to just play around, that's going to be noise. It's going to be awful. Jazz requires you to actually like base yourself off of the key signatures, and you have to know all the chord structures to actually play the free way, right? So the freedom is built upon these structures of laws. Now it's beyond that because it's positive, but it's not like below that. It's not like a separate thing. So I thought the musical analogy was always very helpful to this sort of thing. Yeah,
you're not opposed to the scales. You're not opposed to music theory. You're using the music theory, but just in a way that's unexpected.
All right, I'm going to set Father Bonaventure up for a question as if pertaining to Philip a Foot, since he's always jonesing for said opportunities. So the question is, what difference does reason make? Okay, so we can draw analogies with other natures, like rocks, tend by gravity, and plants tend by biology, and animals tend by instinct. But what difference does reason make? In the sense of, like, what sets us apart from the beast, or what sets us apart from lower creation? And how does that feature into an account as to our flourishing and the role occupied by virtue? You can freestyle as you see fit.
All right, as long as it's with the rules.
Exactly.
No, I think it makes all the difference. I mean, this is what makes the life of virtue possible. The fact that with reason we can actually not just pursue truth, but understand what's good and then make adjustments in order to attain that good. And so we see with the animal life, with plant life, they operate according to a certain instinct, a certain nature they just have. And so moral terms don't really apply to them. Maybe anthropomorphically or by analogy, we might say, oh, like what a good dog, what a bad dog. But really, we've trained it. It's operating according to custom. It's doing what dogs do. Whereas, they don't have abstract thought. They don't have, a dog can't say, I'm sick of being a pet. I'm just going to get a job and rent my own apartment or something. Whereas humans have that freedom, right? We have that ability to think outside the box and to pursue what is the best good among the many goods that we have to choose from. And so another great aspect of that is not only just the free will, but we do share certain things with animals. Aquinas will talk about the different powers of the soul and how we have vegetative powers like plants and animals, and we have sensitive powers, and then we have the rational powers. But the rational powers make better use of the sensitive powers than the animals make use of them. And so whereas animals can feel certain emotions or passions, as he calls them, because we have reason, we can adapt those. And so this is what's really magnificent about the moral life is a lot of times people think the emotions have nothing to do with it, that I have no control over my emotions. It's just the way I feel. How can I help the way I feel? And Aquinas has a strong conviction that, yes, you can, and that there are two virtues that help us to do that, temperance and courage or fortitude, that help to make our emotions more reasonable. And it's difficult, but it's doable. Imagine anybody who has a phobia and then over time works their way through that phobia until they don't have it anymore. Clearly, we can change our emotions. For example, in any conversion, you start by loving sin and then you turn to hating sin. So that's a change of emotion. It becomes more reasonable. And what's most striking is that Aquinas says when you reach that peak of virtue, normally we think of, the reason's got to figure out what to do, and then the will chooses it, and the emotions just kind of get dragged along. But he thinks that in the truly virtuous person, even you can kind of intuit how to act with almost the emotions leading the way, because they're already so habituated to right reason into the truth that if it's a circumstance we haven't deliberated on before, it can actually help guide us there.
Yeah, I like that. I hate Philippa Foot. She has this great line at some point where in the interview she says, well, if we're going to talk with moral life, first thing we need to do is look at what plants do. And I've just nothing for me. Absolutely, I don't give a rip what a plant does. That has nothing to do with the moral life as far as I'm concerned, except some from an analogous, bizarre sense of the good, which is a mistake. Anyway, what I want to go from is the Franciscan angle. So, St. Francis, right? He's not exactly like the magnanimous man that you'd expect to see in Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, right? That guy's got swagger. That guy always repays more than he's given, right? He doesn't like people praising him, which is fair enough. But he also has the sort of
the praise of those lower than him.
Yeah,
he does. Yeah, exactly. This sort of thing. And yeah, he's got a deep voice, and maybe Francis did or something. But he's certainly not the Poverillo. Like he's not that guy in a way. So the virtue thing sounds great, but how have we moved? Like, have we just made Christianity now subservient back to like the Greek model of like virtuous heroes? Or how do we not only get reason in, which you've done well, but how do we get like sanctity? How do we explain the saints, and how do we relate the saints to the virtuous life?
Yeah. I won't, unless we get there, I won't go deep in the weeds on the whole magnanimity thing. I think Aquinas kind of adapts magnanimity from the way Aristotle describes it. He kind of places it under fortitude. Maybe I'm reading Aristotle wrong, but I read the magnanimous person. Sometimes I think he just sounds like he's great, but he's a great jerk too. But in any event, yeah, exactly. He doesn't care what I think.
You're lower, why would he?
Yeah, exactly. So that lowness, right? Speaking of St. Francis, how does grace transform? Mm-hmm. And this is this is like the central question when it comes to theology: is how is it that grace perfects nature rather than destroying it? Mm-hmm. And so, if Aristotle and Plato and the Stoics, right, they're talking about these different virtues, they speak about them in different ways, but they're these perfections we can attain by human nature alone. And then we come in with Christianity and say, oh no, right? You shouldn't be like Achilles doing this, and you shouldn't be like the magnanimous man doing that. You should be humble, and you should be patient, and you should imitate Christ, who took up his cross, or took up the cross. And how do we jive that? So I think that's part of the task of the theologian, the philosopher, Christian philosopher, I guess, is to work that out. So Aquinas teaches that he makes this distinction between acquired virtues and infused virtue. And acquired virtues are the virtues that we can acquire by nature, and it takes a lot of effort and probably a long time. Once it's achieved, the person's going to have this full coordination of the different powers of their soul, their intellect, their will, their passions. They're all working together in harmony. But then he talks about these infused virtues. So these are virtues that come from without. They're infused into us. Infusion is a weird word. The only other context I've heard of it is like tea, lemon infused tea or something like that. And so we start
some of those infused virtues.
Exactly, right? But again, I guess we can kind of use that as an analogy. So when you're drinking the infused tea, you've got the tea, you've got the infused flavor, but as you drink it, you're like, right, what a great infused flavor, but not so great tea. When you drink it, they're just one and the same. Mm-hmm. So they're distinct elements, but they come together as one. So this is the challenge of thinking through infused virtue, that somehow God, by his grace being this participation in the divine nature, which is already is something we need to wrap our minds around somewhat. Yeah. This comes to us from without, not from our activity. Now God says, okay, you're in the state of grace. You now have these character traits. Mm-hmm. So here's our problem. We're like, okay, so are you just possessing me and you're treating me as a puppet, or are these mine and not yours? But if they're mine, like, okay, thanks for them, but how do I work through them? And so we have to deal with this this idea of cooperation and truly cooperative activity, that when we participate in God's nature, right, we are members of the body of Christ. That's really, we have this indwelling of the Holy Trinity. They're acting through us and with us. And so the virtues come to us as a gift of God, and the primacy is always with God. He infuses that grace into us. We act from it with the accompaniment of his grace and cooperation with his grace, and then his grace helps us to complete it. So we first say praise God, but then we secondly say praise to the virtuous person, because it's at one and the same time God's gift, but also your virtue and your character trait.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, okay.
No, I wanted to take the opportunity to use infusion in more senses.
Sure.
So apparently L'Oreal makes a shampoo that's called an herbal infusion of a certain sort.
Mm-hmm.
So you also got that. Merriam-Webster's dictionary also informs us that you can use it metaphorically to describe, for instance, an injection of new ideas into a discussion group or corporation.
But check this out, though. Hold on a minute. Check this out.
Wait for it.
This infusion, I like this infusion business because it's in fusion. And this is what Dr. Whitmore brought up, is that like it's put into something, but then it fuses with that thing. It's not just like put in there. It's like it's integrated with, so it's in fusion. This is a Heideggerian thing. Would be like the infusioning sort of thing. We'd made a new word with a hyphen or something. But I love that. Carry on though. That's nice. I like that. Infusion.
Nice. I think fusus is the past perfect participle of fudere, which means to pour. So it's to pour into. But on account of the fact that German is the Ubersprache, we're going to have to go with
German.
the
English, though. We're going to English. Infusion. Like
okay, nice.
Infusing. I like that.
All right, so thinking specifically about communicating virtue to other individuals, I'm thinking here of Aristotle's point about how to teach practical reason. He's like, oh man, just do what the practical reasoner guy does.
Yeah.
So you're trying to communicate like speculative principles to people, but you're also trying to infuse practical savoir-faire, practical know-how, practical competence to people. You kind of led at the beginning with the acknowledgement that this is tough. Maybe you can get into some, tips and tricks, because
Sure.
people are out there looking for tips and tricks.
I think it's one of the most frustrating parts of virtue for people is that, with the rules, okay, what do I do? Just tell me what to do. With virtue, what do I do? Oh, we'll do what the virtuous person does. Well, right? I don't know any virtuous people. Hopefully we do. My first advice would always be prayer, right? And it sounds stupid. It sounds trite maybe even, but it's often overlooked. I think a lot of times our approach to virtue becomes Pelagian, where it's just, we put all the effort on ourselves. It's like when we're with other people, we want to be polite. So we say, all right, let me do everything I can before I ask for help. And that's good when it comes to human interactions because we're all finite and limited. But then sometimes we apply that to God too. It's like, let me do everything I can before I ask God for help. But it's not, we're setting ourselves up for failure there. We should be asking God for help right from the beginning. So it sounds obvious, but it often is not obvious. So that's the first part. But I would say, like Aristotle says, and Aquinas will back up, we need to seek out those virtuous people. For a pagan, that might be pretty difficult. You got to go look around for where those virtuous people are. For Christians, we have it easy because we have the lives of the saints. And so even if we don't know a virtuous person in our own life, we've got so many different saints that we can look toward from all different walks of life, all different vocations, all different struggles and sufferings. We can find somebody, we're bound to find somebody that we relate to and can connect to. But it's always good too if we can find somebody in our interactions in our daily, I don't know what I'm trying to say, right? The people that we see, I'm trying to not make it sound like the saints aren't real, right? They're real. They're in heaven. They're realer than we are. But it's also good to find virtuous people where we are living here on earth. So finding an accountability partner is also a very good thing because one of the things with virtue is there can also be false virtue. Every virtue is a mean between two extremes. So it's kind of that rational, that reasonable middle point. And we can either go too far or not far enough. But sometimes the vices can look like virtues. Sometimes we can act foolishly, but it looks like courage. Or we can act kind of sneakily and craftily, but it looks like prudence. So having an accountability partner, somebody who's also striving for virtue, is important because they can call us out and we're not going to get upset because we're both trying to help each other grow in virtue. So you have prayer, look to the saints, look to virtuous people, accountability partner, but also knowing ourselves well. And this is one of the strategies that I get really excited about when it comes to Aquinas' teaching on virtue. He has this concept of the virtues being connected. that the human person is one being. We can talk about these different parts of the soul: rational, sensitive, vegetative, intellect, will, all these different things. But really, we're one. And what sin does to us is that it disintegrates us. It makes us so that we're no longer integrated, that we don't have this harmony of intellect and will and passions. And so it's really fitting, right? The wages of sin is death. We see in Genesis 3 that after eating the fruit, they're going to die. The physical disintegration of their body is a sign of the spiritual disintegration that's occurred because they've disobeyed God and they've lost virtue and grace. So if vice pulls us apart, then virtue brings us together. So his concept of the connection of the virtues is that anytime we grow in any virtue, we're actually going to grow in all of them. Because I can only be courageous insofar as I'm also just and prudent and temperate. Or I can only be just insofar as I'm courageous and temperate. If I'm lacking courage, then I'm going to chicken out on the opportunities to be just. Or if I'm lacking prudence, I'm not going to know when to be temperate. So our intuition, or most people's intuition, I think, is I struggle in this virtue, or I struggle with this vice, so I'm going to work on the opposite virtue. And then we don't get very far because we realize I stink at that virtue and I'm just trying to get better at it. I'm just trying to will it, but it's not necessarily happening. So with this concept of the connection of the virtues, if it's true that when one grows, they all grow, then we can use that to our advantage. If we find that there's one virtue that we're stronger at than others, focus on perfecting that one all the more, and it's going to raise the other virtues with it. So maybe somebody struggles with lust, we'll focus on justice. Right? What do I owe to this person I'm talking to right now? I owe the focus on what they're saying. I owe to not think about them in this way. And if you focus on that justice, insofar as you act justly, you will be acting chastely as well, and so you'll grow in the chastity as well. So I think it's maybe not intuitive, but it's a brilliant strategy that Aquinas has.
That is super sneaky. That guy has some real tips. Real tips.
He knew a thing or two.
He knew a thing or two. That guy is great. He's got at least 7 of strategies for this sort of thing. I do like the prayer thing too. I was just reading recently by G. Anscombe's daughter. I talked about how, G. Anscombe's great philosopher in the 20th century, of course, Catholic philosopher, but how she used to pray for anything. So good exam grades and nice weather. This was just a thing she did. And even though she's super smart, and you might think, oh yeah, as you mentioned, don't ask for stuff because that's below. But she had this kind of thing was I don't know. Maybe he'll give it to us. Who knows?
Yeah.
And I like that. I really like that kind of what's the worst case scenario? It's not, people get bothered. We get bothered if someone keeps asking us for stuff that we're not going to do because we're finite and limited. But God might be I'm not giving you freaking toads again. We're not doing it. I'm not giving you the toads. But he still likes to be asked, and it's always helpful to ask. So, I like the idea of asking. Yeah, ask for virtues. Why not? Maybe he'll give it to you. He could do it. It's no problem.
Just don't ask for patience.
No, that's the thing. Or my favorite, I remember asking for humility one time and I stopped myself and I said, no, mean this because I think that's going to come by humiliation. It's do I really want this? And it's not really. And I thought, well, if you want it from me, give it to me. Okay. So so I like that. Pray for things. Okay. The other thing about it is when teaching virtues stuff. I don't know if you have the same experience, but you're teaching Nicomachean ethics or something, you're talking about virtue. And of course, Aristotle says this is for the younger, educated, mature people, right? And by that, I think he means 35-year-olds. And so I teach this to undergrads, and we get to this part in Nicomachean ethics and politics, and it's now he says until you're 35, you really want to understand this stuff, right? So what are we doing, And I always tell them it's planting seeds, right? You're not going to be virtuous right off the bat. You're a college student, you're still kind of the passions are still rocking and rolling, right? But just remember what you said. What do you have? Are Christendom students different than my students? Are they have total the passions and they can just rock and roll on this virtue stuff? Or do you have to also tell them don't give up on it? Believe me, when you're 60, it'll make sense.
No, they're perfect. I get up there,
awesome.
I start teaching it,
Christendom
and
is the best place.
I just sit down because they just start telling me what I'm going to say. So yeah.
Wow.
No, they're like everyone else. They're just repetition is so important, and I think, like you said, planting that seed. If somebody doesn't encounter these ideas, then where are they going to encounter it? Our culture mocks virtue openly for different reasons, right? So some is they just don't desire it, but for other reasons, I think it's because when you try to fit virtue into that rules framework, then what you get is they just become these lists of no's. So chastity isn't like the full, what is the best way to express myself in my relationships with all different people, but now it becomes, I can't do this, can't do that, can't do this, can't do that. Other virtues become unintelligible. Like, how can you command somebody to be courageous? So we don't even talk about that anymore. So yes, how else are you going to encounter these ideas unless you bring them up at some point? And so college is this great opportunity for that, but it takes repetition. I had a student who took me for many different classes, and it was a funny story where in each class we talked about sin at some point, and how the core problem of sinfulness isn't just breaking rules, because God doesn't make arbitrary rules. The rules are there because he knows us better than we know ourselves, and he loves us and he wants the best for us. So the rules are guides to be most fully human. So the core problem of our sinfulness isn't breaking rules. It's that we forsake the opportunity to live fully human lives. So I said that one semester, and I said it again the next semester, and then I said it again the third semester. And then he comes up one day and says, Dr. Whitmore, I had this thought the other day that the real problem with sin isn't that we're just breaking rules, but that we're like not being who we should be. We're not living up to our potential. I'm like, you know what? I'm so glad you figured that. That is great. And just kind of
Inception.
In my mind, I'm like,
yeah.
I said this how many times, but yeah, that's what it takes.
Yeah.
I needed it too, right? I still need it. I still need the reminders.
Yeah. It's like when I was teaching, I've taught math from like middle school up until AP calculus, and we teach the basic FOIL method like 7 years in a row.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes like the final thing, and virtue is at least as hard as foiling polynomials.
Well, the problem with virtue too is that it's not just talking about it. You have to live it. You can't be virtuous. It's just knowledge of ethics. If you're just talking about it, if you're not living, if you're not living it, then you're not experiencing. You're not going to grow in it. And so sometimes we get it up here, but until we get it in our hearts, it's not going to make that difference.
So it's like FOIL plus order of operations. Yeah, plus the quadratic formula.
But infused.
Awesome. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly, man. Infused mathematics.
And if you're having difficulty, listeners, with certain mathematical formulae, know that there is some teaching aids for you online on YouTube, and you might profit from the instruction of one Mr. Chapman from back in the day. So what would you say your best lesson there is online, Father Bonaventure?
Descartes' rule of signs really, that's still only recently. I think that was beat out by like the Khan Academy. I was rocking for a while, and I had one of the comments was I monetized it at one point. I got like $1.50, and then one of my favorite comment I think was like, "Dude, give this man a medal." I like that. That's like if that's the end of life for me, give him a medal. I think that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you heard it here, Godsplaining listeners. If you're not in a position to give Father Bonaventure live toads, you can give him a medal, or you can just communicate to him verbally that he merits both toads and a medal.
Well, you can read this awesome book by Dr. Whitmore. It's got 7 friggin' strategies. I've only got
and no
like
math
rules. And no equations, folks.
Well,
Just
you have you have to be able to count to 7, but
right. Yeah, there are diagrams,
fingers,
though.
We're good.
Yeah.
There are diagrams explaining the nature of the emotions and things of such like. So, great. Well, thank you for taking the time to explain, and thank you for taking the time to join for an episode. Do people purchase your book through Amazon.com, or are there other ways in which they can find it?
You can get it off Ascension's website, so ascensionpress.com/saintlyhabits or Amazon.
Yeah.
If they want a signed copy, what do they have to do?
Find me.
Nice.
I'm in Front Royal, Virginia.
Hunt him
Front
down
Royal,
and go to that
Virginia.
beautiful chapel there too. Christmas is
Brand new
fantastic.
chapel.
That cultural mecca of the East, Front Royal, Virginia, which is attracting Catholics and non-Catholics alike at a rate of like 3,000 per year. If you want to be a realtor, how do you pronounce that word? Realtor. Consider Front Royal, Virginia. Actually, I don't want to cause problems for those who are presently functioning as such in the region. Nevertheless, Front Royal, it's booming. Be there or be square. All right. Thanks again. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, fathers.
All right, turning to you, the listener, thanks for tuning into this episode of Godsplaining. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't yet, whether on YouTube or your podcast app. If you like the episode and leave a 5-star review, that gets the word out to those who could potentially profit from saintly habits. And you can check out Godsplaining.org for updates on upcoming events, of which there are several. I think several kicks in where at 4? Nope, there are a few. There we are. That's a more modest proposal. And then you got merchandise options too. So, know of our prayers for you. Please pray for us, and we'll look forward to chatting with you next time on Godsplaining.